History remembers the men: Hitler, Goebbels, Himmler, the architects of horror. But behind these men stood two women whose stories have remained largely hidden. Women who lived in luxury while millions died. Women who witnessed the inner workings of the Nazi regime from the most intimate vantage points. Eva Braun, Hitler's secret mistress, hidden from the German people for over a decade, who filmed herself laughing and dancing while the world burned. Magda Goebbels, the First Lady of the Third Reich, mother of 6, who chose to murder her own children rather than let them live in a world without Nazis. These women left behind more than tragedy. They left behind wealth, hidden fortunes, financial legacies that continue to this day, legacies worth billions. This is their untold story. Eva Braun was 17 years old when she met Adolf Hitler in 1929. She was working as an assistant to Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's personal photographer, in Munich. Hitler was 40, already a rising political figure. She was a young woman from a middle-class Catholic family, with no particular interest in politics. Their relationship began quietly. Hitler, obsessed with his public image and political ambitions, insisted that it remain secret. He believed that being seen as available and unattached made him more appealing to German women voters. So Eva Braun became his hidden companion, a woman who existed in the shadows of one of history's most public figures. For more than a decade, the German people had no idea Hitler had a romantic partner. Eva lived in Munich, in an apartment Hitler provided for her. She waited. She spent years waiting for Hitler to visit, to call, to acknowledge her existence beyond their private moments. The relationship was profoundly unequal. Hitler controlled everything when they met, where she could go, who she could see. Eva attempted suicide twice, once in 1932 and again in 1935, driven by loneliness, isolation, and Hitler's emotional distance. But Hitler needed her. Not politically, she had no role in the Nazi Party, no official position, no public presence. He needed her personally. She represented normalcy, domesticity, a refuge from the pressures of power. In her company, Hitler could relax, watch movies, listen to music. She was the human element in a life otherwise consumed by ideology and war. By the late 1930 seconds, Eva's life had changed. Hitler moved her to the Berghof, his mountain retreat in Bavaria. There, she became the mistress of one of the most extraordinary homes in Europe, a vast alpine estate where Nazi leadership gathered, where diplomatic meetings occurred, where the machinery of genocide was planned over tea and cake. Eva filmed everything. Using a 16mm camera, she documented life at the Berghof. The footage is eerie. Eva and her friends sunbathing, swimming, laughing. Nazi officials playing with dogs. Hitler relaxing in civilian clothes. The home movies show a world of comfort and leisure, completely disconnected from the reality of what was happening across Europe. But Eva wasn't naive. She knew. By the early 1940 seconds, she understood what the Nazi regime was doing. She had access to Hitler's inner circle. She heard conversations. She saw documents. And she said nothing. She continued filming her cheerful home movies while millions were being murdered. Financially, Eva was entirely dependent on Hitler. He provided her with money, housing, and luxuries, but she had no independent wealth. She didn't work. She had no salary, no business interests. Everything she possessed came from Hitler. But here's what's remarkable. Eva accumulated considerable personal property. Jewelry, clothing, furs, artwork. Hitler showered her with gifts, and Eva carefully preserved them. She understood, perhaps instinctively, that these material possessions were her only security in a relationship that gave her no formal status. As the war turned against Germany, Eva made a fateful decision. In fate, April 1945, as Soviet forces closed in on Berlin, Hitler retreated to the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. Eva Braun insisted on joining him. Against Hitler's orders, against all logic, she traveled to Berlin to be with him in his final days. On the 29th of April 1945, with Soviet artillery shelling the city above, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun were married in a brief civil ceremony in the bunker. Eva had finally achieved the status she'd sought for 16 years, but only hours before the end. The next day, April 30, Hitler and Eva committed suicide. Hitler shot himself. Eva took cyanide. Their bodies were carried to the Reich Chancellery garden, doused with gasoline and burned. Eva Braun died at 33. She left behind no children, no written memoirs, no political legacy. But she left behind questions. What happened to her possessions? Her jewelry, her furs, her personal property? What happened to the wealth Hitler had given her? Most of it disappeared, looted by Soviet soldiers, seized by Allied forces, or simply lost in the chaos of Berlin's final days. But some items survived, and decades later, they began appearing at auctions, purchased by collectors fascinated by the macabre history they represented. Magda Goebbels was everything Eva Braun was not. Politically engaged, socially powerful, and publicly visible. She was, in effect, the First Lady of the Third Reich, the woman who represented Nazi ideals of German womanhood, motherhood, and domesticity. But her story is far darker than Eva's. Magda was born in 1901 to an unmarried mother. Her early life was marked by instability. Her mother married and divorced. Magda was raised partly by her stepfather, a wealthy Jewish businessman named Richard Friedlander. This detail that the future First Lady of Nazi Germany was raised by a Jewish stepfather is one of history's bitter ironies. By the 1922nd, Magda had married and divorced a wealthy industrialist, Günther Quandt, with whom she had a son. The marriage left her financially secure but emotionally unfulfilled. She was searching for meaning, for purpose, for something greater than bourgeois domesticity. She found it in the Nazi Party. In 1930, Magda attended a Nazi rally and heard Joseph Goebbels speak. She was transfixed. Here was passion, ideology, purpose. She joined the party immediately and soon became a volunteer in Goebbels' office. Within months, they were having an affair. Goebbels was smitten. Magda was beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated, everything he wanted in a wife. And she brought something else: legitimacy. Marriage to a respectable, upper-class German woman would help Goebbels' political ambitions and provide a public image of domestic normalcy. They married in 1931, with Adolf Hitler serving as a witness. It was a propaganda coup. The Goebbels family became the model Nazi family, devoted to the party, devoted to the Führer, devoted to the vision of a racially pure Germany. Over the next decade, Magda and Joseph had 6 children together: Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Hulda, Hedda, and Heidi. All were given names starting with hate for Hitler. The children became symbols of Nazi family values, frequently photographed and featured in propaganda. But behind the propaganda, the Goebbels marriage was troubled. Joseph was a serial adulterer. He had affairs with actresses, secretaries, anyone who caught his attention. Magda knew and tolerated it, bound to the marriage by ideology and status. Financially, the Goebbels family was extraordinarily wealthy. Joseph Goebbels, as Reich Minister of Propaganda, controlled vast resources. He had access to state funds, confiscated Jewish property, and the profits from Germany's massive propaganda apparatus. The family lived in luxury, multiple homes, servants, expensive clothing, lavish parties. But here's where the story becomes even more complex. Magda also had wealth from her first marriage. Her ex-husband, Günther Quandt, was one of Germany's wealthiest industrialists. He owned factories that produced batteries, ammunition, and other war materials. During the Nazi era, Quandt's businesses prospered enormously, using slave labor from concentration camps to maximize profits. Magda's son from her first marriage, Harold Quandt, inherited much of this wealth, and through him, Magda's descendants became some of the wealthiest people in post-war Germany. Today, the Quandt family, which includes Magda Goebbels' step-grandchildren, controls nearly 50% of BMW and has an estimated net worth exceeding $50 billion. This is one of history's most disturbing financial legacies. Wealth built on Nazi collaboration, slave labor, and genocide continues to generate billions in the 21st century. But Magda Goebbels never saw this future. Her story ends in the Führer bunker. As Germany collapsed in April 1945, the Goebbels family retreated to the bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. Joseph Goebbels remained fanatically loyal to Hitler, convinced that even in defeat the Nazi cause was righteous. Magda shared his conviction. On the 1st of May 1945, the day after Hitler's suicide, Magda Goebbels made a decision that shocks even decades later. She murdered her 6 children. The children, aged 4 to 12, were given morphine to make them sleep. Then, one by one, Magda and an SS dentist crushed cyanide capsules in their mouths. All 6 children died. Magda's reasoning was chilling. She believed that her children could not live in a world without National Socialism. She believed that life after Nazi Germany's defeat would be unbearable for them. So she killed them to spare them from a future she couldn't imagine them surviving. Hours later, Magda and Joseph Goebbels committed suicide in the Reich Chancellery garden. Magda Goebbels died at 43. She left behind no written explanation for her final act, but she left behind a financial legacy that continues to generate controversy and outrage. The financial legacies of Eva Braun and Magda Goebbels are studies in contrast. Eva left behind almost nothing. She had no independent wealth, no business interests, no investments. Everything she possessed came from Hitler, and when Berlin fell, virtually all of it was lost or looted. A few items survived: pieces of jewelry, personal letters, some of her home movies. These items occasionally appear at auctions, where collectors pay extraordinary sums for artifacts connected to Hitler. In 2010, a collection of Eva's letters sold for over $100,000. In 2016, her underwear sold at auction for over $4,000. It's macabre, but it reveals something about how Nazi history has been commodified, turned into collectibles, curiosities, objects to be bought and sold. Magda's financial legacy is far more substantial and far more troubling. Through her first marriage to Günther Quandt, Magda's family became connected to one of Germany's wealthiest industrial dynasties. The Quandt family's businesses produced batteries, ammunition, and military equipment during World War II, using slave labor from concentration camps. After the war, Günther Quandt was investigated for Nazi collaboration but was never prosecuted. He rebuilt his business empire during Germany's post-war economic boom. When he died in 1954, his fortune passed to his sons, including Harold Quandt, Magda's son from her first marriage. Harold Quandt inherited billions. He expanded the family businesses, invested in new industries, and became one of post-war Germany's most successful industrialists. When he died in 1967, his wealth passed to his children, Magda Goebbels' grandchildren. Today, the Quandt family controls nearly 50% of BMW, one of the world's most valuable automotive companies. The family's net worth is estimated at over $50 billion, making them one of the wealthiest families in Germany and one of the wealthiest in the world. This creates an extraordinary ethical problem. Should wealth built on Nazi collaboration and slave labor be allowed to continue generating profits? Should the descendants of Nazi-era industrialists be held accountable for the crimes that created their family fortunes? The Quandt family has attempted to address this history. In 2007, family members commissioned an independent study of their business's role during the Nazi era. The study confirmed what historians had long known. Quandt Industries used thousands of slave laborers, contributed to the Nazi war effort, and profited enormously from collaboration with the regime. The family issued an apology. They made donations to Holocaust survivors and educational causes, but they retained their wealth, and that wealth continues to grow. Critics argue that this is insufficient. They point out that no amount of charitable giving can undo the harm caused by slave labor and collaboration with genocide. They argue that descendants who inherit Nazi-era wealth have a moral obligation to make comprehensive restitution, not just symbolic donations. The Quandt family's response has been that they were not personally responsible for the crimes committed by their ancestors. They argue that they have acknowledged the history, apologized, and made efforts to address it. They believe that trying to redistribute wealth decades after the events is neither practical nor just. This debate continues, and it's not unique to the Quandt family. Across Germany and Europe, there are families whose wealth originated in Nazi-era collaboration, whose businesses profited from slave labor, whose fortunes were built on crimes against humanity. The question remains, what is the appropriate response to inherited wealth that originated in genocide? Eva Braun and Magda Goebbels lived at the center of Nazi power, but neither had real authority. This is one of the paradoxes of their stories. They were intimately connected to Hitler and Goebbels, men who wielded absolute power over life and death. But as women in Nazi Germany, Eva and Magda had no formal political roles, no official positions, no power of their own. Nazi ideology was explicitly anti-feminist. The regime believed that women belonged in the home, focused on children, cooking and church, the 3 Ks, Kinder, Küche, Kirche. Women were discouraged from working, from pursuing higher education, from participating in politics. Magda Goebbels embraced this ideology publicly. She presented herself as the ideal Nazi mother devoted to her children, supportive of her husband, dedicated to domestic life. She gave speeches praising motherhood and traditional gender roles. But privately, Magda was far more complex. She was politically engaged, intellectually sophisticated, and deeply involved in Nazi ideology. She attended party meetings, participated in policy discussions, and wielded significant informal influence through her husband and her relationship with Hitler. Eva Braun, by contrast, had no interest in politics. She didn't attend rallies, didn't join the party, didn't involve herself in ideological discussions. She existed in a parallel world, one of leisure, entertainment, and domestic comfort, deliberately separated from the political machinery of the regime. This separation was intentional. Hitler wanted Eva to represent normalcy, to be his refuge from politics. He didn't want her involved in party matters, didn't want her to have opinions on policy, didn't want her to be anything other than his private companion. Both women were trapped by the regime's gender ideology. They lived in luxury, enjoyed privileges beyond most Germans' imagination, but they had no real power. They were ornaments, symbols, reflections of the men they were attached to, and when the regime collapsed, they paid the ultimate price. The Führerbunker in April 1945 was a place of psychological collapse. As Soviet artillery pounded Berlin above, the Nazi leadership huddled underground, clinging to fantasies of miraculous victory, while reality closed in around them. Eva Braun arrived in Berlin against Hitler's orders. She could have fled to Bavaria, could have survived the war, could have lived decades longer. Instead, she chose to die with Hitler. Why? The most likely answer is that Eva's entire identity was tied to Hitler. For 16 years, she had existed only in relation to him. Without Hitler, who was she? What would she do? Where would she go? She chose death because she couldn't imagine life without him. Magda Goebbels faced a different choice. She had children. 6 children who could have been evacuated, sent to safety, given a chance to survive. But Magda refused. She insisted on bringing all 6 children into the bunker, keeping them there as Berlin fell. Witnesses later described the children playing in the bunker corridors, unaware of what was coming. They were told they were going on a trip. They were told everything would be fine. On the 1st of May 1945, Magda Goebbels gave her children morphine. Then, she murdered them. One by one. All 6. The act is almost incomprehensible. How does a mother kill her own children? What ideology, what belief system, what psychological state makes such an act possible? Magda left no explanation, but Nazi ideology provides the context. The regime had spent 12 years teaching that life under non-Aryan rule was unbearable, that defeat meant the end of everything worth living for, that death was preferable to surrender. Magda internalized this completely. She believed it, and she killed her children because of it. After the children were dead, Magda and Joseph Goebbels went outside and killed themselves. Soviet soldiers found the bodies hours later. What are we to make of Eva Braun and Magda Goebbels? They were not perpetrators in the legal sense, neither held official positions, neither directly ordered atrocities. Neither killed anyone except, in Magda's case, her own children. But they were complicit. They lived in luxury, while millions died. They enjoyed privileges extracted from a genocidal regime. They knew what was happening, and did nothing to stop it. Eva Braun filmed her cheerful home movies at Berghof while Jews were being murdered in concentration camps. Magda Goebbels hosted elegant parties while her husband orchestrated propaganda that dehumanized entire populations, and the financial legacies, particularly the Quandt family fortune, remain controversial. Should descendants bear responsibility for wealth built on slave labor and genocide? Should that wealth be redistributed to survivors and their descendants? Or is it unfair to hold people accountable for crimes they didn't personally commit? These questions have no easy answers, but they demand to be asked. The stories of Eva Braun and Magda Goebbels reveal how ordinary people, women without formal power, women focused on domestic life, become entangled in monstrous regimes. They show how ideology can justify unthinkable acts. And they demonstrate how the consequences of those acts echo across generations. History prefers to focus on the men, the Führers, the generals, the architects of policy. But understanding Nazi Germany requires understanding all of its participants, including the women who lived at the regime's center. Eva Braun and Magda Goebbels were not heroes. They were not victims. They were complicated, complicit figures whose choices reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature, ideology, and power. Eva chose love over morality, companionship over conscience. Magda chose ideology over her children's lives. Both made choices that, decades later, remain difficult to comprehend. And the financial legacies, the billions in inherited Nazi-era wealth, force us to confront questions about justice, responsibility, and whether historical crimes can ever be fully addressed. The women behind the Reich left behind more than tragedy. They left behind mysteries that remain unsolved, wealth that remains controversial,